Agape is not sentimental. It does not coddle. It is not a gentle balm we apply to wounds to make ourselves feel righteous. It is a consuming fire that strips us of illusions, especially the illusion of our own virtue. Pride is subtle and adaptive. It weaves itself into charity, into service, into good works. And agape exposes this, not to shame us, but to sanctify us. Consider the life of Saint Leoba, an Anglo-Saxon noblewoman who left her homeland to evangelize the Germanic people in the 8th century. She was educated, esteemed, and trusted by royalty. Her spiritual authority was unquestioned, yet agape did not allow her to stay in comfort. She was called into dense, unfamiliar forests, asked to give counsel to kings, and simultaneously nurse the sick in silence. She knelt to tend the feet of the very people she once taught. Pride whispered, "You are above this," but agape pressed her down into the soil of humility, into the anonymity of service. She was buried at the feet of Saint Boniface, not as a gesture of subservience, but as a testament to a life that put obedience before honor. Agape does not fear the humiliation that breaks our self-importance. It seeks it out. Saint Roch of Montpellier, born into nobility, could have remained among silks and incense. Instead, he traveled to plague-stricken villages, quietly healing the sick. When he himself became diseased, he was cast out. Hiding in a forest, he survived only because a dog brought him bread. The man who once walked among palaces was now crawling in dirt. And yet, agape did not abandon him there. It revealed itself more purely. His pride had been in being a healer, in being needed. Now stripped of usefulness, he discovered love not as action, but as presence. Agape invites us to be broken open by mercy. And nowhere is this more true than when we are confronted with someone else's success. It is easy to celebrate others when we feel secure, but agape tests our pride when others receive what we longed for. Saint Alphonsa of the Immaculate Conception, a cloistered nun in India, desired anonymity and silence. Yet even behind convent walls, she struggled with envy of sisters more eloquent, more praised. Her letters reveal a wrestling, the ache of invisibility. But agape taught her that obscurity is a sanctuary. Her illnesses deepened, and she became bedridden, hidden, forgotten, yet more radiant in that hiddenness than many who preach to thousands. Pride resists dependence. It longs to be strong, to serve others from a place of power. But agape invites us to be the one in need, the one who receives. Saint John of God, a 16th century Portuguese soldier turned servant of the poor, once burned with prideful zeal. He believed suffering proved holiness. He sought out hardship to prove his worth. But when his mind broke under spiritual torment and he was locked in an asylum, the humility of being helpless taught him more than 100 acts of charity ever could. He came to see that agape is not what we offer, it is what we allow to be done in us. Agape strips the performance from repentance. Saint Mary of Egypt, once a notorious courtesan, encountered conversion not through social shame but through a mysterious block. She physically could not enter a church in Jerusalem. Her pride in her beauty and sexual power shattered. She fled into the desert and remained there for decades, unknown and unsought. She did not blog about her repentance. She did not write a memoir. Her holiness grew in silence, and when she was finally discovered by the monk Zosimus, her body was emaciated and her voice was almost gone. But agape had bloomed in her, quiet, rooted, unshakable. When we serve others from a place of superiority, pride remains untouched. But when we are asked to be corrected, to receive instruction, agape begins its deeper work. Saint Bessarion, a desert father, once found a monk sleeping during communal prayer. Rather than waking or rebuking him, Bessarion knelt beside him and prayed until the monk woke. Agape does not humiliate, it humbles. He had the authority to scold, but he chose silence, placing himself beneath the offender in spirit. It is pride that insists on being the corrector. It is agape that carries another's failure with dignity. Pride seeks justice for the self, agape yields. Saint Olga of Kiev, before her conversion, was a ruthless ruler. But after her baptism, she changed, not just her faith, but her temperament. She stopped seeking revenge and allowed herself to appear weak for the sake of peace. Her enemies saw her restraint and mocked her, but in heaven's eyes, her restraint echoed the crucified Christ. Pride would have destroyed her enemies. Agape let them go. There is a peculiar pride in always being the bigger person, in being the one who forgives, who understands, who is spiritually mature. But agape doesn't allow us to secretly feel superior. It turns the mirror toward our own soul. Blessed Matt Talbot, an Irish laborer and recovering alcoholic, walked past pubs and prayed outside them for the men drinking inside, not in judgment, but in solidarity. He chained himself to Christ, not in public displays of piety, but in the quiet, everyday struggle of sobriety. Agape made him see himself in the very people others dismissed. Sometimes pride clings to victimhood. It insists that our suffering entitles us to resentment. But agape disarms this too. Saint Josephine Bakhita, born in Sudan and sold into slavery, endured unspeakable violence. She was beaten, branded, and treated worse than property. Yet when she was freed and became a nun, she referred to her captors as those through whom she found Christ. She forgave, not because she was naive, but because she refused to let their cruelty define her soul. Pride would have preserved the wound. Agape transfigured it. Even in faith communities, pride festers. It disguises itself as theological correctness, moral superiority, spiritual insight. St. Andrew of Crete once refused to speak for decades out of fear that his eloquence was rooted in vanity. When he finally preached again, his words were so infused with humility that they became songs of repentance. Pride can preach doctrine, but only agape preaches with tears. Pride wants to win, agape wants to endure. Saint Amand of Maastricht evangelized pagan tribes in the 7th century. He was rejected again and again, mocked and thrown out of villages. Any worldly leader would have moved on. But he stayed, not because he was successful, but because he was faithful. Agape remains when applause ends. It washes the same feet, prays the same prayers, plants the same seeds, content to never see the harvest. There is a strange form of pride in being indispensable. They need me, we think, hiding our ego beneath sacrifice. Saint Zdislava of Lemberg, a 13th century noblewoman, nursed lepers in her own home. But when she grew ill, she had to let others care for her. Her struggle was not with death, it was with accepting help. Agape taught her that sometimes we glorify God more by receiving than by doing. Agape calls us to embrace obscurity. Saint Conrad of Parzam was a porter for a Capuchin monastery. He opened the door and greeted visitors for over 40 years. He was not a preacher, a bishop, or a martyr. Yet he did this one task with such gentleness and constancy that people came just to see his face. Pride would have asked for a greater ministry. Agape made the doorpost holy. When we are criticized unfairly, pride demands rebuttal. Agape absorbs the blow. Saint Marciana of Toledo was accused of heresy and imprisoned for years. She refused to defend herself, trusting that truth needed no spectacle. She spent her days praying for her accusers. Her vindication came not through triumph, but through endurance. Sometimes agape forces us to re-examine our image. We are proud of being kind, generous, virtuous. But agape reminds us, these are not achievements, they are gifts. Saint Benedict Joseph Labre, a homeless pilgrim, wandered from shrine to shrine. He smelled, he was dirty, and often people crossed the street to avoid him. Yet he gave away what little he had, prayed without ceasing, and died alone. Pride would have hated being mistaken for a beggar. Agape allowed him to become one. There is even pride in grief. We grieve as those who wish to be seen as loyal, broken, faithful in loss. But agape turns grief into quiet surrender. Saint Théophane Vinard, a missionary to Vietnam, was imprisoned and sentenced to death. In a letter to his father, he wrote, not of injustice, but joy. I am singing in my cage, he said. Pride would have written a lament. Agape wrote a hymn. When we cling to the right to be angry, agape challenges us. Saint Doulis, a Syrian martyr, was tortured without mercy. His executioners paused between beatings, expecting rage. Instead, he blessed them. You do not understand what you do, he whispered. Pride would have cursed them. Agape wept for them. Pride guards the self. Agape spends it. Pride protects reputation. Agape is unconcerned with it. Pride saves face. Agape washes feet. The deeper we go into the life of Christ, the more we see this inversion. The king born in a stable, the master kneeling with a towel, the Messiah mocked on a cross. Nothing in agape aligns with the instincts of pride. But here's the mystery. As agape strips us, it does not leave us bare. It clothes us in something greater, freedom. When pride dies, joy is born. The kind of joy that does not fear obscurity, failure, or misinterpretation. The joy of being poured out, not for credit, but for love. This is what the saints knew. Not just the famous ones, but the forgotten ones. The janitor monk, the exiled widow, the mute intercessor. They show us that when agape challenges our pride, it is not to crush us, but to liberate us. It invites us into a life that no longer needs to prove, protect, or promote itself. And in that emptying, we are most full.